It began on a quiet Saturday morning in Willow Creek Estates, a picture-perfect suburban enclave wrapped in stone walls, blooming dogwoods, and the suffocating embrace of its homeowners association. The manicured hedges and uniform mailboxes disguised the truth. This wasn't a neighborhood, it was a regime, and the woman ruling over it all was Brenda McLachlan. Mr. Harrison, a calm, reserved man in his early 40s, with the quiet confidence of a military veteran, was sipping his second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. His wife, Sarah, was working the early dispatch shift from her home office upstairs, her headset already glued to her ear. When he opened the door, there she was, Brenda, wearing her usual HoA-issue blue polo, clipboard clutched like a weapon, and her smartphone camera already on standby. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she chirped, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here for your interior compliance inspection." He blinked, unsure he'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" he said, stepping halfway out the door. "Interior compliance?" She tapped the clipboard with a red fingernail. "Yes, there. Have been concerns raised regarding the drapery in your front living room window. Your curtains are visible from the street, and according to subsection 4.3 of the HoA guidelines, all visible interior features must reflect the neighborhood's designated ambiance. Yours? Do not." Mr. Harrison leaned against the door frame, folding his arms. "You're telling me you want to inspect the inside of my house because of my curtains?" Brenda sniffed. "It's protocol, Mr. Harrison. We've had complaints." He raised an eyebrow. "Complaints from who?" She hesitated just a second too long. "Anonymous sources. Multiple." He didn't move. "You're not coming inside my house, Brenda." Her eyes narrowed. "Refusal to cooperate with an HoA directive may be grounds for formal reprimand or citation, possibly even legal escalation." "Try it," he said, and closed the door in her face. Brenda stood on the front step for a full 30 seconds, fuming. In her mind, the HoA was sacred. She believed in structure, control, symmetry. Her own life had spiraled into chaos after her divorce and bankruptcy years ago. But here, in Willow Creek Estates, she had reclaimed power. And now a man like Mr. Harrison, a man with zero fear in his eyes, was threatening to unravel that control. She wouldn't allow it. Upstairs, Sarah Harrison removed her headset and walked to the top of the stairs. She'd heard the entire exchange. Her office window overlooked the porch, and she'd watched Brenda roll up in her Lexus like a storm cloud in pearls. She knew Brenda's type well. Controlling, petty, paranoid. Over the past year, she and her husband had received warnings for infractions like leaving a trash can visible for more than 30 minutes or having a non-conforming mailbox flag. Brenda's anonymous complaints always seemed to trace back to one person. But this? Demanding access to inspect curtains? Sarah exhaled slowly and returned to her desk. The dispatch room at the county sheriff's office was busy that morning. Car, accidents, a domestic disturbance, and a stranded motorist near the state highway. But even with everything going on, her gut told her this situation with Brenda wasn't over. Minutes later, she was proven right. Life in Willow Creek Estates was supposed to be idyllic. That's how the brochure described it. Safe, elegant, harmonious. But no one mentioned the surveillance, the endless rule changes, the mandatory garden gnome purge of 2022. The HoA board, led by Brenda, had turned the neighborhood into a suburban surveillance state. There were cameras at the entrances, and Brenda had even proposed a drone patrol system once, thankfully shot down by a rare uprising of fed-up homeowners. Still, her reach was impressive. She'd once fined a resident for painting their back fence eggshell instead of alabaster. Another time, she ordered a family to remove a child's inflatable pool, citing temporary aquatic hazards. Residents joked that Brenda could detect an unsanctioned bird feeder from a mile away. But her vendetta against the Harrisons had taken on a personal flavor. Some suspected jealousy. Others thought it was power projection. But Mr. Harrison's calm refusal to bend the knee made him a symbol of quiet rebellion in a neighborhood where most people caved to avoid confrontation. Brenda couldn't allow symbols. She crushed them. It hadn't always been this way. When the Harrisons moved in 2 years ago, they tried to be neighborly. They attended their first 2 HoA meetings, brought cookies to the block party, and Sarah even offered to help update the HoA's website. But then came the citations. First, for a slightly faded American flag. Then for letting their dog briefly pee on the edge of the community rose bed. The kicker was the hand-painted birdhouse Sarah had hung from the front tree. Brenda had it removed and impounded for not matching the community color palette. The final straw came last winter during a meeting when Mr. Harrison, tired of the condescension, calmly quoted the HoA bylaws aloud, verbatim, after Brenda tried to pass a new rule about holiday light bulb wattage. "You're incorrect, Brenda," he'd said, smiling slightly. Page 6, paragraph 3. Homeowners may display holiday lights between November 15th and January 10th, without restriction on bulb type. Brenda had flushed, stammered, and lost the vote. She never forgave him. Since then, she had watched the Harrisons' house like a hawk, measured their lawn height, counted vehicles in their driveway. She once asked if their recycling bin had been sorted properly, and now it was the curtains. Brenda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was manufacturing them. And her fixation with Mr. Harrison had become a twisted game of cat and mouse every morning. She took a walk with her Pomeranian, Wellington, a yapping furball dressed in monogrammed sweaters. But the walk was a cover. Her real purpose was inspection. Clipboard in hand, she noted which houses had garage doors left open too long, which porches had packages sitting out for more than 2 hours, which curtains didn't match the warm, neutral palette approved by the HoA. And for weeks, Brenda had been documenting the Harrisons' living room window. She had pictures, notes, measurements of the curtain drop length. She even speculated whether the finials were brass or faux brass. She wrote in her log, "Curtains appear dark red, possibly burgundy. Clashes with community tones. Potential fire hazard if material is synthetic. Request physical inspection." It wasn't just obsession. It was a crusade. Her dream was to convert Willow Creek Estates into a nationally recognized HoA model, the standard of suburban order, and the Harrisons were the last stain on her perfect canvas. That morning, after being denied entry, she stormed back to her Lexus and sat inside, fuming. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her phone. She opened her HoA app and filed a Level 2 escalation request. Then she did something reckless. She dialed 911. Sarah sat at her workstation in the county 911 dispatch center, sipping her third coffee of the morning. The call boards had been relatively calm so far. A fender bender out on Route 12, a noise complaint in Old Town, and a diabetic emergency from one of the assisted living centers. Standard Wednesday fare. When the next call came in, it lit up her screen with a location that made her brows lift, her own address. She answered with her usual professional tone. 911, what's your emergency? The voice that followed made her spine go rigid, not from alarm but sheer disbelief. Yes, hello. This is Brenda McLachlan, president of the Willow Creek HoA. I need immediate assistance. There's a very dangerous man, aggressive and possibly armed, refusing to comply with community regulations. He has barricaded himself in his house and is threatening me. Please, you must send someone. Sarah froze for only a second. That voice, nasal, shrill, and dripping with entitled hysteria, was unmistakable. She'd endured it at neighborhood meetings, at the mailbox, and in HoA-wide emails filled with passive-aggressive tone policing. Brenda. She forced herself to remain calm. Her training kicked in. First, de-escalate. Second, gather facts. Third, Initiate protocol. Ma'am, Sarah said, keeping her voice perfectly even. Can you confirm the address? 1223 Ivy Glen Lane. And I'm the one in danger, in case that's not clear. That address is noted. What specifically is the individual doing that makes you feel threatened? He's blocking entry to his home. Myself and the HoA board have the right to conduct inspections, and he is being extremely hostile. He's verbally aggressive, possibly armed, and I fear for my safety. Sarah's fingers were already flying across her keyboard. Her first action: pull up the active units closest to Ivy Glen. She knew Officer Calderon was doing his rounds in Willow Creek that morning. He was a calm presence, known for his level-headedness and disdain for frivolous calls. Next, she opened her internal notes panel. Quietly, she began tagging the call with internal flags: possible false report, personal conflict. Caller known HoA authority. Dispatcher has personal connection to address. This was a professional gray zone. On one hand, she had to take every emergency call seriously. On the other, she was intimately familiar with the caller and the supposed suspect. Ma'am, Sarah continued, voice still measured. Are there any weapons visible? Has the individual physically threatened you or brandished a weapon of any kind? No, not yet, Brenda huffed, catching herself. But it's the kind of situation that could escalate. I just don't feel safe. Translation: No, nothing actually happened yet. Sarah could barely contain her exhale. The nerve of this woman. She had stormed onto private property, demanded to inspect their curtains, and now had the audacity to use emergency resources as a power play. I'm dispatching an officer to assess the situation, Sarah said. Please, remain in a safe place and do not approach the individual again. Oh, I'm already in my car, locked in, awaiting backup. The melodrama in Brenda's voice was nauseating. Sarah disconnected the call and immediately sent a private ping to Officer Calderon's unit. Alert. Non-emergency escalation. Known HoA conflict. Handle with discretion. You're responding to my house, Calderon. Keep it chill. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, followed by, Your favorite pastel tyrant again? She smirked in spite of herself. The squad car rolled up to Ivy Glen Lane with the lights off. Officer Calderon had taken his time getting there. He knew Sarah wouldn't send him into a real threat without a real reason. And when she'd sent the keep it chill text, he already suspected it was HoA nonsense. Brenda was easy to spot, even from the cruiser. She stood next to her champagne-colored Buick, arms crossed, lips pursed so tight they practically disappeared into her face. Her mint-green pantsuit, which practically glowed under the morning sun, made her look like a sentient breath mint. Calderon parked a good 10 feet away and took his time getting out of the car. He adjusted his sunglasses, straightened his belt, and approached Brenda with all the urgency of a man responding to a cat stuck in a tree. Good morning, ma'am, he said with an easy smile. You reported a disturbance. Yes, officer, Brenda replied, her voice shrill with theatrical urgency. I was threatened, verbally, and refused entry to conduct an official inspection. I believe the resident may be armed and is acting aggressively. He was clearly hiding something. Calderon blinked once. Armed, you say? Yes. I didn't see a weapon, but I felt threatened. The energy was aggressive. He glanced past her at the Harrison residence. All was quiet. No curtains twitching, no dogs barking. Just the faint smell of brewing coffee wafting from the slightly ajar kitchen window. Do you have documentation for the inspection you attempted to conduct? He asked. Brenda faltered, but only for a second. It was a routine interior ambiance inspection, part of our HoA compliance initiative. Calderon raised an eyebrow. Interior ambiance. Yes, the curtains, decorative cohesion violations. The silence that followed was deafening. You tried to enter someone's private home to inspect their curtains, he repeated. Brenda puffed up. Within my rights as HoA president. I see. He pulled out his notepad, more for show than anything. And Mr. Harrison, did he threaten you physically? He was dismissive, condescending. He wouldn't let me in. That's obstruction. And I felt unsafe. Calderon nodded thoughtfully. Well, let's just see what Mr. Harrison has to say. He knocked on the front door, which opened almost immediately. Mr. Harrison stood there, arms crossed loosely, coffee in hand, expression calm. Officer? Harrison said politely. Can I help you? Calderon gave a little shrug. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Harrison. Just checking in. Had a call about a potential disturbance. Everything okay here? Couldn't be more peaceful, Harrison said. Unless curtain patterns now qualify as domestic unrest, Calderon grinned. Mind if I step inside for a minute? Just to check the box. Of course, Harrison said, stepping aside. But I warn you, the decorative cohesion is highly questionable. Back at the dispatch center, Sarah wasn't just sitting idly. She was building a paper trail. First, she pulled the full audio of the 911 call and flagged it for supervisory review. Abuse of the emergency system wasn't taken lightly, especially when it involved false claims of threats or weapons. She appended the file with her own statement, careful not to editorialize, but including facts. The caller attempted to initiate a non-permitted interior home inspection. The subject displayed no signs of aggression during prior neighborhood interactions. The caller is known to the dispatcher as a frequent enforcer of questionable HoA policy. The dispatcher has personal knowledge of the subject's demeanor and safety profile. Next, she opened a form under the department's Abuse of Emergency Services category, a rarely used but powerful tool when community members made a habit of wasting time and resources. Sarah checked the boxes for false report of potential threat no, visible weapon or escalation, known personal vendetta or pattern of harassment. She knew the report would be reviewed by a civilian affairs liaison and possibly forwarded to the county attorney's office. That was Brenda's first mistake. But Sarah wasn't finished. She also uploaded the audio and summary into the HoA Conflict Mediation Portal, an unofficial but valuable channel between the HoA Oversight Committee and local authorities. It was set up specifically because Willow Creek had generated so many calls over the years, many from the same select few board members. Sarah hit submit and sat back in her chair. Let the HoA Oversight Board try to explain away this one. After exchanging small talk about curtain rods and coffee brands with Mr. Harrison inside the house, just long enough to make a show of investigating, Officer Calderon stepped back outside. Brenda was waiting by her car, clearly expecting handcuffs or at least a stern rebuke of her nemesis. Well? She asked. Calderon replaced his sunglasses and gave her a friendly but firm smile. No violations observed, he said. Home is secure, resident cooperative. Nothing threatening on the premises. Brenda's jaw dropped. But he refused. He refused an unauthorized entry. That's not illegal. That's well within his rights. Her eyes narrowed. He was sarcastic. That's not a crime either, ma'am. He leaned in slightly, voice still calm but more deliberate. I'm going to have to advise you not to call 911 for personal disputes again. That channel is for emergencies, actual threats to life and property. Filing a false report could result in penalties, fines, or legal action. And we do keep records. Brenda turned red, not with embarrassment but rage. I was just doing my duty, she huffed. Protecting community standards. Of course, Calderon said, nodding politely. And I'm doing mine, making sure public resources aren't misused. You have a good day now. It didn't take long for the story to make the rounds. By mid-afternoon, at least 5 neighbors had stopped by Mr. Harrison's mailbox, coincidentally, while walking their dogs or watering their hedges, offering subtle thumbs-ups and barely disguised grins. You stood your ground, said old Mr. Keene from down the street, whose rose bushes had once been cited for floral overproduction. "Well done," said Lisa Chang, a mom of 3 who'd once received a citation for sidewalk chalk art deemed overly whimsical. Even the neighborhood Facebook group, usually a war zone of lost cat sightings and heated debates over trash bin placement, seemed to align. A post appeared that evening from an anonymous user. To the neighbor who stood up to unwanted curtain inspections, "You are a legume." The 911 center was never truly quiet, not in a county like theirs. Between petty disturbances, medical calls, and the occasional high-speed pursuit, there was always background noise, a chorus of voices on headsets, and muted radio chatter. But, as Sarah Harrison took her position in the dispatch seat just after 9:15 that morning, she sensed the unusual tone of urgency when Brenda McLachlan's call lit up her terminal. "911, what's your emergency?" Sarah's voice was clear, composed, practiced, but the high-pitched hysteria on the other end made her sit up straighter. "This is Brenda McLachlan, HoA president of Willow Creek Estates, and I am in danger. There is a man, an aggressive, potentially armed man, barricaded in a house on Sycamore Lane. He threatened me. He's refusing lawful entry. He's got this wild look like he could snap." Sarah's fingers froze over her keyboard. Her face didn't show the jolt that raced down her spine, but her breath hitched. Ever so slightly, she recognized the voice instantly. Brenda, and she also knew exactly who Brenda was talking about. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" Sarah asked, her voice steady even as her mind raced. She glanced quickly at the address Brenda gave. Yes, it was her house. Her husband. This woman had really lost it. "I'm outside the house," Brenda continued. "I was performing a compliance inspection and he became hostile. He refused to let me in, and he might be armed. He could have weapons." Sarah closed her eyes for half a second. There was no weapon. Her husband didn't own a gun. He was a former public school teacher and current freelance graphic designer who was probably still drinking coffee in his bathrobe. The most dangerous item within his reach was likely a novelty mug shaped like a dragon. But Sarah couldn't ignore the protocol. "Not fully. Units have been dispatched," Sarah said, typing the call into the system with careful phrasing, flagging the caller as unconfirmed threat source. She selected the tag for possible harassment hoax, a discreet notation. She also routed the call to the on-duty shift commander, Sergeant Bill Landon, who had known her and her husband for nearly a decade. Still, even with the note, once potential, barricaded subject, and possible weapon entered the call log. Patrol cars moved. Fast. Within 3 minutes, 2 cruisers were already en route. Brenda remained on the line, melodramatically describing Harrison's supposed menacing energy, his threatening refusal, and militia-style defiance. Sarah sat calmly, listening to every word like a stone. Yet beneath the surface, the slow, determined rumble of fury was building. Brenda had no idea what she had unleashed. The cruisers pulled up with lights flashing but sirens muted. A silent approach, per protocol, when entering a potentially dangerous standoff. Officers Darren Foley and Jennifer Kwan exited their vehicles, hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning the quiet, picturesque street. Brenda was waving them down from the curb like she was flagging down a taxi, her posture over-dramatized, her face twisted into her best "I've survived a traumatic event" performance. "There!" she hissed, pointing at Harrison's front door. "He's inside. He's dangerous. He wouldn't let me inspect his home." He looked unhinged. Kwan raised an eyebrow. "You were inside his home?" "No, I wasn't allowed in." "But that's just it," he refused. "That's obstruction. I'm the HoA president. This is serious." Foley exchanged a glance with Kwan. They had been on enough calls involving HOAs to know how exaggerated these encounters often were. But policy required a check-in. As they approached the door, it opened before they could knock. Harrison stood there, wearing gray sweatpants, a faded NASA hoodie, and holding a ceramic mug that read, "World's Okayest Husband." His expression was neutral, mild confusion with a faint overlay of resigned irritation. "Officers," he said calmly. "I assume this is about Brenda?" Folly's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Sir, we got a call reporting a possible disturbance and a concern for public safety. Are you armed?" "Only with caffeine," Harrison replied, raising his mug. Quan gave a half shrug. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" "Not at all. Want to come in?" Brenda didn't make it inside, so I assume it's still a legally boring living room. Folly and Quan stepped in carefully, eyes sweeping the area. No weapons, no barricades, just a cozy home with a stack of books by the window, a sleepy dog on the rug, and the faint smell of cinnamon. Clearly not a threat. "Mind telling us what happened?" Quan asked. Harrison explained everything. The unsolicited inspection request, Brenda's insistence on entering without notice or cause, and her dramatic reaction to being denied. Folly nodded slowly. "So she just called 911 because you wouldn't let her inspect your curtains?" "She said they were out of compliance with seasonal ambiance," Harrison deadpanned. "Also, apparently, my finials are subversive." The officers didn't laugh, but it was a close thing. Outside, Brenda was still gesturing theatrically, trying to peer in. Quan tapped her radio mic. "Dispatch, be advised. No immediate threat. Resident is calm and cooperative. No evidence of weapons or disturbance. Recommend downgrade." Sarah's voice came through, calm and dry. "Copy that, Unit 2. Document and proceed as needed." Brenda nearly tripped over herself trying to meet the officers as they exited the house. "Well? Did you see the curtains? The finials?" His aggression. Quan held up a hand. "Ma'am, we didn't see anything that would justify an emergency call." Mr. Harrison was polite, calm, and in his own home, which you attempted to enter without his permission or any legal grounds. "But he refused an inspection." "He refused to let someone with no warrant or legal authority into his house. That's not a crime." Brenda's lips parted, then closed again. "But I'm the HoA president." "And the HoA is not law enforcement," Folly said bluntly. "You are not empowered to conduct forced entries or demand inspections without notice or consent. And reporting a non-existent emergency to 911 is a serious offense." Brenda blinked. "Are you accusing me?" "We're informing you," Quan said coolly. "This was a misuse of emergency services. A formal warning will be noted. If we receive another frivolous call from this address regarding non-emergencies, you may be subject to citation or further investigation." The color drained from Brenda's face. Her eyes darted back toward Harrison's house. "He's manipulating the narrative," she muttered. "He's hiding something, I know it." "You need to leave now," Folly said firmly. "And do not return to this property without documented HoA notice and proper scheduling. Otherwise, you may be charged with trespassing." Brenda opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it. She turned on her heel, muttering something about speaking to her lawyer and lodging a formal protest with the HoA board. But her steps were slower, her posture deflated. Sarah pulled into the driveway a little after 2 p.m., the last of her dispatch shift behind her. Harrison met her at the door, holding out a fresh cup of coffee like a peace offering. Or maybe a victory toast. "You handled that call like a seasoned professional," he said, grinning. "You'd be surprised how often I deal with people." "Like Brenda?" she replied, stepping inside. "But it was the first time one of them called on my house." They sat on the couch together, a blanket pulled over their laps despite the warm afternoon sun. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "She really tried to paint you as a dangerous maniac," Sarah said. "And you were just vibing with a cup of coffee and a sci-fi novel." "I was reading Dune," he said proudly. "Very dangerous literature." "She said you were barricaded." "I mean, I did have the dog barricading the ottoman." They both laughed. The tension from earlier in the day drained out of them, with each chuckle. For once, the absurdity of Brenda's behavior wasn't exhausting. It was downright comical. Sarah looked at him, eyes sparkling. She didn't realize who she was calling. She practically delivered her delusion directly into the hands of someone who knows the system better than she does. And she did it on record, Harrison added. I bet she'll think twice next time before trying that stunt. Oh no, Sarah said, mock seriously. Brenda doesn't think, she plots. The fallout began subtly, like the first cracks, in a frozen pond. It started with a few texts from neighbors who'd seen the flashing lights that morning and had already heard the story. Gossiped from porch to porch, filtered through the neighborhood grapevine faster than Brenda could write her next passive-aggressive bulletin. She really called 911 over curtains? One neighbor wrote. Is she insane? Enough is enough, another said. This woman's been terrorizing us for years. By the next HoA meeting, scheduled for the following week, a quiet rebellion had already begun to form. Flyers circulated anonymously. Is Brenda McLachlan really serving our community? The flyer listed not only her overreach at Harrison's home but several other examples: baseless warnings, window peeking, and inappropriate inspections of properties without consent. Harrison and Sarah, for their part, stayed quiet. They didn't need to lead the charge. The neighborhood was ready to rise. People who'd previously been too tired or afraid of Brenda's scrutiny began to speak up. The silent majority, once cowed into compliance, now found their voice. They were inspired not just by Harrison's calm resistance, but by Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. The 911 call and the resulting police response had pushed her too far. She was no longer just annoying. She was a liability. A motion to recall her as HoA president began to circulate. Petitions appeared in mailboxes. Committee members who, once backed her, hesitated, suddenly unwilling to defend her actions.